Welcome to the Endurance Drive podcast.
Our mission is to share the key principles that structure our approach to endurance training and coaching.
I'm Jim.
And I'm Katie.
And fellow listeners, as you can probably hear, we're a little bit stuffed up on this episode. What's going on, Katie?
Yeah, we've both been sick, and I feel like more than half my athletes are sick right now. And I was actually a little bit sick earlier in this season. It seems like this is one of the worst kind of upper respiratory / COVID / flu seasons that we've had in such a long time, paired with one of the coldest winters ever. And honestly, I'm just so over it. I don't know about you, but I'm done with winter.
It was a tough week for a lot of athletes, a tough week for us. We both had the flu, and it's been cold. So it's been hard to stay healthy and to gain fitness in February.
Yes, but the good thing is, as always, setbacks give us a lot of really good insights and lessons for the podcast. And I think we've both been thinking a lot about kind of resting, when to push through, when to recover, and how to just best take care of yourself physically and mentally as we kind of round out the winter right now. So I don't know, Jim, should we get started with some of those insights?
Absolutely. Well, how can I keep them? I'm going to keep mine brief today because you can tell I'm very stuffed up. But yeah, let's fire away. Let's go for it.
That sounds good. All right. So my first insight, it's kind of related to what we were just talking about. I just want to shout out to so many athletes who I've been really seeing taking initiative and listening to their bodies. So whether it's sickness or life stress or just burnout, whatever's going on, I feel like as the season has evolved, we've really seen more and more athletes who are comfortable with making decisions on their own of like, should I be pushing through or should I not be pushing through and take some rest today? So I just want to read some highlighted quotes that I've seen drop in through Training Peaks in the past week. Someone said, wasn't really feeling the pickups today, so I did 6 out of 10, but otherwise a good run. That's awesome. You don't have to do 10 out of 10 pickups. It sounds like you nailed the intention of the workout. So shout out to the athlete who sent that in. Another one, it was about 1 degree outside and icy. The spot where the hills are wasn't plowed and I was having some GI issues. Bottom line, I just wasn't feeling it. I was taking the dog with me for the warm-up and about 10 minutes in, decided to just take it slower with him instead of doing the hills and speed work. I love that. It's totally okay to modify down. Sometimes you're not feeling that speed run, but you go out and do something a little bit shorter. So that's another great one. Another example here, someone said, mostly kept it easy, tired after an early shift today, but ate and rested, then knocked this out, skipping the lifting later today. Again, if you've got doubles, you can just do one. You don't have to do both. And then someone else finally said, LSS was very high today after work. This felt super hard, but I'm proud of myself that I just showed up. So again, it doesn't have to be the perfect workout. Sometimes just showing up is huge. So I just wanted to put this out there in case any athletes feel like they have trouble kind of modifying when you're not feeling it. I actually think that's a really, really important skill as an athlete that we all build over time, is knowing that it's not, you always have to do the workout perfectly. Sometimes it's so much better to listen to your body. So hopefully this is a little bit of inspiration for some of our athletes out there. Just think about when you need to modify and don't be afraid to do it. And I, as a coach, when I see stuff like this, I'm like, yes, this is exactly what we're trying to do. We don't want you to do everything perfectly all the time. And I bet all these athletes were feeling a lot better after that workout that they modified.
Nothing makes me prouder than seeing comments like this in Training Peaks, because I think, oh my gosh, we've done the education and folks are thinking for themselves. You know, we talked about this before. There's a very limited scope of what we can help people with because we're remote coaches. And so you are in charge of your health, and we love it when you take charge and modify the workout as needed.
Absolutely. And I think this actually leads into my next insight, which is more of a question or thoughts that I wanted to go through with you, Jim, which is a broader discussion of when we should push through and when we should back off. Because even for me, I mean, I've been doing this for a long time. You've been doing this for a long time. And sometimes we don't get it exactly right with figuring out when you should be pushing harder versus not. A couple things to just think about in that are, number one, I think it's helpful to avoid kind of all or nothing thinking. So for example, if you don't want to do your speed workout because you're not really feeling it, or maybe you're a little bit under the weather, but not super sick, you don't have to say, okay, I'm going to do absolutely nothing and sit on my couch. You could say, all right, I'm going to do a short, easy run instead of my speed workout. Think about an exercise snack, for example. Or if, let's say, you've got a Z2 run and you don't want to do it, well, ask yourself, like, do I want to take a walk? Am I interested in maybe doing a bike instead? Do I just not want to be outside? Do I want to go to the pool? There's a lot of different ways that you could set out that way. And then similarly, too, if you're like, oh, I really don't want to drag myself to the gym right now, could you do 20 minutes of body weight stuff and bands at home? That's definitely better than nothing. And I think it's often helpful to just avoid thinking that if you don't do your perfect workout, there's no alternatives whatsoever. Now, I would also say there are some times when you should actually just lean into taking the red box, though, and not doing the workout altogether. So a couple things that I think about when I'm running through, okay, is this a day where we want to skip it entirely, are when your LSS or life stress score at baseline is like a 9+ out of 10, or if you experience an LSS event that is a 9+ out of 10, that is a really good idea to just lean into taking the red box. We will all go through stuff like that sometimes, and I think all of us should know ourselves pretty well to know when something's a 9 and something's more of just like annoying, or a 4, but you can still probably go get your workout in. So I would use that as a free pass to take the red box. Another one that I think about is like sleep. So, if, for example, getting your workout done means getting less than, say, 6.5 hours of sleep, again, this number is very different for different people. Some people work really, really well on 6.5 hours of sleep. I personally don't. I have a meltdown if I get less than like 7 hours of sleep. But if you're like, okay, the only way to get this in is for me to wake up at 4 a.m. tomorrow and I'm not going to get any sleep, I would say just take the red box. It's not going to serve you to really push through into that workout. This one should go without saying, but if you're injured or really, really sick, thinking about like if you have the flu, if you have a fever, if you have body aches, fatigue, all of that stuff, do not push through and do your workout. If you've got something like kind of lingering cold symptoms, sometimes it's okay, but you have to really, really listen to your body with that. And I think if you're thinking through all those things, it's just important to know that sometimes that red box is going to be okay. Don't stress too much about it because there's always the next workout. Jim, is there anything else you'd add to just thinking about when to push through and when to back off?
I think one of the other things that I've been thinking more about recently is just like, will it cause a major disturbance in your family life? And I think sometimes, I have been very, very guilty of this for many, many years of being very dogmatic. Like the plan says this, I must do this. And I could have avoided just a lot of friction in the past if I just said, oh, wait a minute, just take the 0 today and then restart tomorrow with your day. And when things are just more aligned in your life. And so that's one thing I've been trying to get better at myself.
Yeah, I love that. And I think it's important too to think about if you maybe take that red box one day, you might actually feel better the next day. Number one, on a family life dimension, but number two, just on an overall feeling dimension. I think we've probably both experienced this before. And I think I'm experiencing it now, and I'm at the tail end of getting sick, where my body actually feels great. Like I've taken some full rest days and just kind of laid around and activated the parasympathetic mode in a way that I don't usually. And I've slept a lot. And I'm like, wow, I'm actually really, really excited to get back into training because I think I'm going to feel amazing and probably way better than if I hadn't taken those red boxes or if I just sort of like, done a bunch of like Z1 sort of still loading the body, etc. I've definitely done that in the past, but this time around I feel pretty good about just going back into it. Just challenge yourself to try that and you might feel amazing with red boxes for any reason, whether it's sickness, whether it's LSS, whether it's anything else. Your body might actually be repairing itself in that time, which will make you have a bigger breakthrough afterwards.
Yeah, I hate to say this, but sometimes I get like somewhat relieved when some of my athletes get just maybe just a little bit sick, and I realize, okay, they're going to take like 2, 3, 4, 5 days off because we're always so going, going, going. And I felt that this week, when I got sick, I was like, okay, I'm going to take a lot of red boxes this week, but it's all about next week. So that's the first thing. And I've accumulated a lot of training, and it's been hard to do, but I've accumulated a lot of stress in this last January, February. So I do need a few days off. And like you and I are both going to come back stronger next week and probably feel great. So I hate to say, I don't want people to get sick. When they get sick, I'm always like, this is an opportunity to rest and a real opportunity to rest. And I just think, 99.9% of the time when people get sick, they come out just better at the other end.
Totally, yeah. So fingers crossed for that. We'll keep people updated. Hopefully now our voices don't sound like we're better, but we're getting there. So that is the goal. And then, okay, my last insight here. So in addition to coming off being sick, I'm also coming off a ski trip. So I was out in Utah about a week ago and it was really fun and I got some good skiing in, but I was at high altitude. And I remember this time last year, I was also in Utah and I also talked about altitude on the podcast. But if you missed it, I just wanted to put a disclaimer out there that altitude is really, really hard on the body. And I'm sure that probably being in that environment, plus a lot of flights where everybody on the plane is sick, did not help my immune system very much. So just a couple things to be aware of if you're going anywhere in altitude, if you're going on a ski trip, if you're going out to the mountains. A few things that I keep tabs on are number one, it is much easier to get dehydrated when you're at altitude. And there's also a little bit of an appetite suppressant effect that I've learned about with being at altitude. Your appetite is not as good as it is at sea level. And yet you are burning more calories. You have a higher kind of metabolic rate at that point, and you need more calories. So I just find that whenever I go on a trip like this, it's so, so important to maintain a ton of intentionality around fueling really, really well and hydrating really, really well, because your probably normal cues of like thirst and hunger are not really going to help you that much because they might be a little bit muted. So I'm always like, all right, gotta stay on the wagon with snacks, with drinks, all of that to just make sure that I'm really topped off and not getting super depleted. This is also true when you're skiing all day. Like you're sometimes not paying attention to that type of thing. So if you are in our group of endurance athletes that likes to go ski, just make sure that those things are top of mind. And then if you are doing any of your regular endurance training while you're out there, keep in mind that it's probably going to feel a lot harder. Your heart rate will probably be significantly higher as you're adjusting. And I remember I went for a run at one point. There was snow all over the roads. It's high altitude. And I think my run pace for Z2 was probably like a minute and a half to 2 minutes off what I was used to at sea level. And it's funny because I'm like really having a tough time with this mentally out there. And I'm trying to remind myself, like, what are all the things you say on the podcast all the time about honoring the intention of the workout and throwing out the data and not judging it. And I was still like so angry during this run. So I cooled down after that. And it's also possible that I was right at the beginning of getting sick, which wouldn't have helped the situation. But just going to put this out there, even though I'm bad at it, please honor the intention of the workout. And in this case, I was like, all right, we're going to run kind of 2 minutes off our usual zone 2 run pace. We're just going to slog around. We're going to get an hour in at zone 2, which was the goal for today. And I came back to sea level. And other than being sick, I did feel pretty good for like 1 or 2 days before I started feeling not so great. So know that you are building that fitness. But yeah, just really, really take care of yourself and know that it's hard. So many of our athletes are doing that this time of year.
How is your resting heart rate out there?
Yeah, that's another thing. Resting heart rate goes up, up, up when you're out there. HRV can come down. Again, I'm having trouble sort of sorting out what the effects of like on the beginning of getting sick as well as travel were. But every time that I've gone out in the past, my resting heart rate does go up, which usually suggests that there's a little bit more stress and strain on your body. And then as soon as you come back to sea level, it should probably be fine.
I found it really helpful this week to have, wearing, actually, we always trashed Garmin, but I actually was appreciating Garmin this week. We're looking at my resting heart rate. I could tell when I was getting sick. I could tell when I was sick, and I could tell when I was getting better. And the other tool that I used this week was a simple mouth thermometer, which was great because I had a fever for a long time, and I'd feel a little better. I'd take my temperature. I took my temperature a lot. But it was just really interesting to tell me, like, am I over the fever, or is this headache part of the fever, or is this part of like so-and-so? So I had between the two, I really felt like I knew a lot more what was going on in my body. So between the heart rate monitor and just the thermometer.
I feel like we can call a digital thermometer the poor man's Oura ring, right? Because my Oura ring told me when I had a fever, it was like, whoa, major signs of strain detected. I was like, yeah, I know, I feel like shit. But it was good to get confirmation that, yes, I was not okay.
Interesting. Okay, so Aura does that as well. Okay, all right. So it does it internal. Okay, all right.
Yeah. And honestly, normally it's tracking body temperature for like lots of other reasons. I think that's like another indicator of strain and it's useful for cycle tracking, but it knows when you have a fever. It's like, whoa, this is way outside your norm. And I think it logged like one of my highest temperatures that I've ever had on the Oura ring just because I haven't had a fever in a long time. And it was pretty worried about me, but I was okay. And now the fever is broken.
Can you use the Aura ring when you exercise inside, like you don't have a fan on? Does it do your internal temperature? Can you see it rise up?
It is not that high tech, unfortunately. I would say the Oura Ring works best when you're very, very still. It's terrible at anything like movement tracking. So I've talked about this before, where if I go for a run, my Oura Ring will say my average heart rate was like 200. When my Garmin heart rate strap says it's like 135 or whatever it is. And so I think it only is really good at both the core temp sensei. It's not even core temp, it's like skin temp on your finger. But I think it's only good at doing that when you're completely still at night. So I really only use it for valuable data when I am completely still.
All right, so it's not a replacement for the core temp unit that we've been.
Yes, and is not a replacement for the digital thermometer either, because core temperature is digital. Yeah. So anyway, I didn't expect us to get on that tangent about digital thermometers, but maybe that's our gear pick of the week.
That could be. That's right. I forgot about that. My gosh. Wow.
All right, Jim, take it away. What are your insights?
Like I say, I'm going to keep mine a little bit brief today, but first thing I want to start with is just like, I want folks to start being aware that you start working at a few open water sightings in your pool. And generally that just means like every 7 to 9 strokes, or to make it easy, just twice every 25 yards during sunset, just start working on open water sighting. I'm not going to try to explain open water sighting on a podcast because that's impossible, but I put in a couple video links here as well. And I think the other key point here is that your open water sighting stroke should feel quite natural. And so if it feels kind of awkward, kind of weird, feels like you're kind of just off, you're probably not doing it right, which is great. It's kind of the binary thing. When you get it right, it sort of fits right in with your usual catch-up stroke. It's basically just a slight variation of the catch-up stroke. So anyway, start playing with it now, because I really find like for myself, like it takes, 3, 4, 5, maybe even 6 sessions at pool to start to feel just natural with the stroke. But hey, it's going to be March here pretty soon, and races are starting to appear on the calendar.
Yeah, this is a great tip. And I would say, too, if you also want to simulate some open water stuff, do your sighting practice with paddles and buoy. We've talked about how that, or using like sim shorts, are great ways to feel what it's like with the wetsuit and not have your hips so low in the water. So if you're really having trouble letting that open water sighting stroke click, it can help to just have the buoy and let your hips sit high so you won't be kind of sinking.
Yeah, and I find the paddles are just fantastic at that as well, too. It just keeps you really grab a lot of water and you can really pull your head up. So yeah, excellent points. A second point here is consider doing some Training Peaks virtual racing. I've sort of jumped into this a little bit this year just to get a little bit more intensity with the volume I've been doing on the bike. And I will say that, it's really hard. As triathletes, we tend to be, these zone 2 aerobic masters. And so going hard on these races, it's very uncomfortable. And I have to find myself way off the back of a lot of these races. And I have to remind myself that, okay, it doesn't matter, where I come in. I'm just here for the intensity. So the first one I just said, okay, I'm going to pick a longer race, but I went for 30 minutes. And after 30 minutes, I was like, wow, I've worked really hard and I'm going to jump out of the race. And it was no big deal because I'm in a virtual world and I'm in my basement. So I can just hit the escape button and I'm out. So it's a very low pressure situation. And I really got a lot of good work in. Second time I raced, I did 60 minutes and I was really surprised myself. And I got to about 45. I was like, oh, that's going to be done. But then I'm like, what if I went the full hour? What if I was like an FTP test? And so anyway, again, super fun. But a couple things to bear in mind if you do that is that a lot of folks equipment is probably miscalibrated. So if you feel like you're off the back right away, but it's going so quickly and so fast, part of it is that, folks don't have their trainers properly or their power meters or any of that stuff really going on. So don't worry about where you are in terms of placing because the gear can be all wonky for lots of different people. The second point is be prepared to go off really hot and really be prepared to go the first 3 to 5 minutes just really hard. And this is something that happens in any bike race. I don't know why, but roadies like to do this and people in general do this. The gun goes off and people go really, really hard for say 2 to 5 minutes. And as a triathlete, I'm often like, why are we going so hard? Why are we doing 120% of FTP? Who can keep this up? And I start to begin to wonder right away, oh my God, am I the weakest person here because I can't keep up? And all these people are going by me. And I realized that it's just that first 3 to 5 minutes. So get a big warm up in. I love to do 30 to 40 minutes of easy. And then when the race starts, just get after it and consider that first 3 to 5 minutes as basically like a VO2 interval and establish yourself, in a group that's appropriate for you. And, when you're hurting, believe me, everybody else is hurting as well too. And the race will eventually just settle down and you'll get into a group of people. And again, I've been really enjoying working with folks in little groups that I've been in to get dropped by some groups. Maybe I'll pick back up again and again. But anyway, it's been really interesting. Just give it a shot. And the nice part is that it leads into my third and last point, which is that then you can follow up that next day with a very, very easy spin. And when I say easy spin, like heart rate cap of like 110, 120, which is really, really, really easy. And think easy, you're not trying to build any fitness. You're not trying to do endurance. You're not even trying to do zone 2. You're not trying to have any kind of real muscular fatigue. You're just trying to regenerate and just go super easy. So it's a nice way, maybe Wednesday you do a hard race and then on Thursday you're doing a 30 to 60 minute, like just, 110 easy spin. So nice way to sort of build some bike volume and treat yourself the next day.
This is awesome. Kudos to you for doing this because I get nervous around racing in general, and especially I feel like a TPV or a Zwift race would make me a little bit nervous. I've done one in my life, and I was like, nope, never again, not gonna do that. But I'm curious, actually. So if you had an athlete who you wanted to get an FTP test value for them, do you think they could just do a race instead, for example? And do you think that would be any easier, kind of mentally, physically, than doing a standard FTP test?
I think for me, the peer pressure is much easier than in a race. So what's interesting today is that actually for all my races, basically my normalized power has come out at basically where my FTP is, if we wait long enough. And so it's been a way for me to check. I thought my FTP is here and I did the 60 minutes and it turns out that 60 minutes is right on that number. And I felt that way at the 30-minute effort as well too. And so yeah, I think for me personally, it's a great way to get intensity. I'll never work that hard for that long on the bike. Like I can do 1 minute, 2 minute intervals, that kind of stuff. But if you said to me, here's a workout that's 60 minutes long and you got to go as hard as you can for 60 minutes, I would never do it. And I don't do it. And I simply don't do it. We have all these great workouts. I don't do any of them, but I'll be happy to jump into a race and work so much harder than I would ever work in a workout because I'm with a group of people and I just feel this kind of this peer pressure, but I also feel this camaraderie with people, and you're riding with people from all over the world and you'll get into a group of say 2 or 3 people and you realize, hey, all these folks are sitting somewhere else in the world and we're all kind of about the same, equal talent. And this is kind of fun. And so you let someone go ahead, you can draft a little bit. And then, it's just, I've been finding it really, really, really fun to do. I'm excited to do more of it this year. And also it's a good way also to get some heat training in as well too, because you rev up your system quite a bit. So I've been wearing the core temp, been looking at that a little bit as well too. So getting a little bit of heat training as well.
That's awesome. All right. That was a pretty convincing sell. So I will have to check out some of this racing. And one thing that I just really like that you pulled out is the idea that the first one was pretty hard and then the second one was easier and the third one was easier after that. It's just like any unfamiliar stimulus, right? Like me sitting right here, this sounds like the most insane thing ever and I would never, never want to do it. But I'm sure if I did it, it would be fine. And that's just like our athletes where like the first time we give you a hill workout, it probably looks like the scariest workout ever. The first time you get a long run over like however many miles and then you do it and you're like, oh, that was actually completely fine. The anticipation was way worse than the actual thing. So I like bringing that to kind of anything that's new or scary that we do. And maybe that will carry me into trying out one of these races.
Yeah, I know many folks of ours probably may be following the SWAP podcast. And I think the third video series they have, and David's doing, I think he's running up Gold Hill. It's a great YouTube video. We'll put a link into it. But he talks a lot about pressure and about what's on the other side of pressure or failure. And I've always said, on the other side of pressure is nothing really. Like you're still going to have your family, you're still going to be who you are at the end of it. But I really like his take on it, which was that the other side is just love. It's just like, we should embrace this because we're so lucky to be able to embrace this. And it's just a silly thing we're doing. So I'm doing a silly race and I'm nervous about it. Of course I'm nervous about it because I want to do well and I'm a human being. But then I do it and I realize, okay, even if it's a total failure, like, so what? Like, that was so awesome. Like, what skin do I really have in the game in this whole thing? So I just love his take on it. And I've been thinking a lot more about like pressure, and just trying to take on bigger challenges that I know I'm scared of and I'm scared of failing. But then I realize like I'm not really failing at all. I'm actually bringing myself up.
Yeah, I mean that's a whole podcast topic I feel like we could do on pressure and what's on the other side of pressure. So let's file that away. But for today, in the interest of time, I think we should move into our main content, which is really, really exciting. We are for the first time ever having a repeat guest. So we're gonna bring back our favorite physical therapist, Neil MacKenzie, who's been on the podcast before, who has talked about injury prevention, strength training, and we're gonna basically ask him a bunch of questions, kind of following up on our episode from over a year ago. So that was episode 12. We're linking in the show notes. But yeah, without further ado, enjoy this amazing interview with Neil MacKenzie. I think everyone will get a lot out of it.
Neil MacKenzie, welcome back to the Endurance Tribe podcast.
Thank you guys for having me. I'm honored to be back again.
We did a full episode with Neil, episode 12. So everybody should check that out. But Neil, can you give us a quick background on who you are again?
Yeah, so I'm a physical therapist. I work in the Lebanon, New Hampshire area. I work at an outpatient ortho sports clinic, and the bulk of my caseload is athletes ranging from high schoolers to weekend warriors. I started working with Jim about 5 years ago. He got me ready and through Lake Placid. And since then, that's kind of helped shape some of my clinical practice as well. And I've made a transition working more with endurance athletes and really kind of finding my niche with that here in the Upper Valley.
Well, as listeners know, we always refer to you a lot. And we say, you're the go-to guy. You're the guy. We have questions. We said, let's go to Neil. Or we always say to people, like, if they have PT questions, always seek out Neil. So thanks for being here. So we are in late winter, coming up to spring here. What are some of the common mistakes you're seeing folks making sort of this time of year?
Yeah, I think everyone's excited this time of year to get started with training plans and to start putting in some big mileage. And I think what we see in general is just people building up too much too soon. That can either be from a overall volume perspective or from an intensity perspective. So, a lot of people doing big fall marathons or big races in the late fall and then kind of expecting to maintain that fitness over the course of a season break and jumping back into similar paces or mileage. And, it's a time of year that we see a lot of overuse injuries, particularly tendinopathies.
Can I ask you, Neil, what are the tendinopathies that you tend to see? Like, what are the most common injuries that are popping up when people are doing this too fast, too soon, or too much too soon?
Yeah, I think for me personally, I see a lot of Achilles tendinopathy, particularly in runners. And around here, you can't run without being on a hill. So a lot of change in elevation and stress across the Achilles as such. But patellar tendinopathy for our swimmers, we see some rotator cuff tendinopathy as well. So that's another group where we don't talk about all that much, but the swimmers getting back into the pool after not swimming for 3 months or 6 months certainly can see some swimmer shoulder type symptoms.
Do you tend to see a lot of folks, like it seems like with high school, folks move from one sport to the next sport to the next sport? Do you start to see that at the beginning of the season? You always know like when school starts because a certain number of people will be coming in because of the sport specific injuries.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's like shin splint season will happen twice a year when kids transition back to cross country and to spring track. But yeah, I mean, here, our year is kind of dictated by the seasons and the sports that people are playing. So we see a ton of skiing injuries in the winter that are a little bit more traumatic based, and then a lot of running and, cycling injuries in the summer.
Yep. So when you make a rehab plan with an athlete, I know like I had the luxury of seeing you a lot when I had my injury. What are some of the ways that folks, when you get a plan from your PT, say, how do you gauge like your progress? How are things going? Because I always had questions like, am I doing the right things? Are the things I'm doing, is it progressing me forward? Like what advice would you give to folks and say you get a plan, you say this is how you can tell you are progressing along in your plan?
Yeah, good question. I think pain's obviously a very powerful indicator with that. So as symptoms start to improve, I think people obviously feel that the plan is working and that progress is being made. But especially in the early stages, sometimes we don't really feel a huge difference in pain, and that can be very draining for an individual. So I think just really trying to keep an open line of communication with your PT, your chiro, whoever you're seeing, and asking questions of, is this what you expect? I tried my best to set expectations from the beginning of, in 4 weeks, this is where I'd like you to be. In 8 weeks, this is where I'd like you to be. And painting a rehab picture of when the expectation to start running and those higher impact tasks actually come into play. But I think, indicators from a physical perspective are initially that like daily life tasks are okay. So I can get out of bed and put weight on my foot first thing in the morning. I can go up and down stairs without having pain. And those are barriers that we have to check off before we start thinking about getting back into performance with running or cycling or whatever it is. And then I think mentally, just the confidence or someone's willingness to move. So when we're hurt, there's often kinesiophobia or fear of movement. And as you start to just trust your body more, people are more willing and apt to try things and to start moving again. And I think that's a huge indicator that the program is working.
Can I ask you another question about pain here? So this is sort of pain after an injury's been happened and they've been seeing you. What about if we move back to the early stages of like something feels a little bit off? I have a niggle. I'm not sure if I should push through. How can we use pain as a reliable indicator for like making a game time decision in our workouts now when we're not sure if something is exactly right?
Yeah, I think what I often tell people is that pain is such a complex thing to really like define. So I really try to stay away from, the 0 to 10 scale when talking with people. But during the activity, and it could be swimming, cycling, running, or hiking, whatever it is, if you're having pain that's getting progressively worse over the course of an activity, and that you would define it as sharp. With running, we talk about if you're starting to limp or having to change your gait mechanics. Those are all really kind of yellow to red flags of, all right, today is not my day. And doesn't mean that you can't come back to it in a day or two, but those are usually signs that you have to take some time off. The other indicator is that if pain remains above baseline for more than 24 hours, it's probably time to take a little bit of time off and to address, some things from a mobility perspective or strength perspective, whatever it is.
That's terrific advice. And I think, your job would be pretty easy if it was just in like the mechanical rehab of triathletes. But there's obviously this huge psychological perspective and aspect of your job because we're all nuts as triathletes and runners and athletes in general. So what are the common sort of mental and emotional challenges that you see in athletes and how do you help them cope with these mental challenges during this time of recovery?
Yeah, I mean, we all hate to see Training Peaks workouts turn red, right? So I think from my end, I understand where athletes are coming from when they're not able to be active and to be doing the thing that they love. And, it's my job to keep people as active as possible, but to also be safe in doing so. So I think with providers that are, accustomed to working with endurance athletes, the answer is very rarely to stop doing everything completely, but it's finding that balance. Again, that's safe for people to kind of continue to burn off some energy and burn off some steam. So that may not necessarily mean running, but are they safe to get into the pool? Are they safe to be on an elliptical? What are some other avenues so that they can still feel like an athlete throughout the entire process? But I also think that relates back to the previous point of really keeping an open line of communication with your provider and talking to them about what you're frustrated about, what your goals are, so that they can continue to modify your plan of care moving forward.
Can I ask, Neil, are there any situations in which you would actually say complete rest is 100% the answer? Different types of injuries where you're not really supposed to be doing any type of anything, depending on the circumstances?
Yeah, so bone stress injuries are certainly a time where we have to back off, and the mechanism of that injury is super important as well. So you guys have talked a lot about red S on this podcast, and I think that's a really important topic and a great question because if someone has a bone stress injury and they could go swimming or they could do these other things, if there's still an energy deficiency, really we need to have complete rest to help reset the system in a sense.
Yeah, that's good to know. And I'm curious then, if you think about the ideal care team for someone who maybe is experiencing a BSI or REDS, it sounds like it might not just be a physical therapist. Of course, you're an important role, but maybe kind of getting a dietitian on board, getting a doctor on board, getting a maybe even a therapist on board. How do you think about kind of building a holistic care team for someone?
Yeah, absolutely. It has to be multidisciplinary because we're only really touching one bucket from a PT perspective. And, in New Hampshire, we're fortunate in that we're an open access or direct access state. So we'll see people coming in off the street who are running and they present with a bone stress injury, but don't have any imaging or anything along those lines. So, we try to screen as best as we can for REDS, for bone stress injuries and things along those lines. But what we have to do is have a team in the Upper Valley area and refer those people out for imaging so that we know what we're working with and we can make a holistic plan. And I think you're spot on that getting a dietitian involved, sometimes a mental health provider, like really building a robust team around those athletes so that they can be successful when they do come back.
I think the only reason why I had Neil on here was I wanted to talk about run warm-ups. I'm on a mission to convince everybody to do a good run warm-ups. So, okay. So why should runners, triathletes do a run warm-up, Neil? Tell us, preach it.
Yeah, I have to confess here, I'm not the best at this myself. So I'm better at it this year, especially when it's so cold out. Can't just like pop out the door anymore and go for a run. But, I think one of the biggest benefits of it is that it slowly increases your heart rate. So, just starting to increase core temperature increases blood flow to the muscles, um, which at the end of the day is going to improve pliability, flexibility, and the efficiency of the muscles that we're using for whatever the activity is. With that, it helps reduce the risk of injury. It's going to improve coordination and overall athleticism, especially when you start adding, dynamic skipping into the warm up routine. So it's certainly something that I've tried to be better with myself, but I think it's somewhat seasonal dependent too. So on a day when it's 10 degrees outside, I know that I have to do a more prolific running warm up or I'm going to be dragging. And, I certainly think that I'll see that reflected in pace as well throughout the duration of the workout. So if there's any speed work, I certainly try to be a little bit more proactive with it.
And do you have a recommended sort of best of run warm-up, like just in general from like any time of year?
Yeah, I think starting slow. So I introduce and incorporate a lot of marching with my athletes. So doing some high knee marches with a 2 to 3 second hold, thinking of a tall, upright, proud posture. We'll then work into some lunging type activities, but then it doesn't look all that dissimilar from what a high school soccer warm up would look like. So things like high knees, butt kickers, A skips, B skips. If you're coordinating, you can do a C skip, C skips, but just starting out slow and then gradually building up the dynamic aspect of it over the course of the warm up. I very rarely have people do static stretching beforehand. I think that's something that we can save for afterwards, but just to try and get the body moving and again, feel athletic before you start running, I think is super important.
And what about, band work? Do you recommend that?
Yeah, it depends. I think with certain injuries coming back from, I will recommend some banded work. So my go-tos are lateral band walks. I think they're never a bad answer. They're super challenging. And if we can be more efficient from a lateral perspective or stronger from a lateral perspective, it's going to make us more efficient moving forward. And I think we're all such uniplanar athletes in general. And if we can build some laterality into the mix, it's certainly helpful.
And speaking of working on these different planes, I think we should probably revisit the idea of strength training, which of course Jim and I preach about all the time, but I think we need an expert in the room to tell us a little bit more about why should we be lifting heavy and what that should look like. So can you kind of recap just strength training for endurance athletes, how to approach it?
Yeah. So sarcopenia is basically the age related loss of muscle. And when we hit our 30s, we lose upwards of you'll sometimes see 10% of our muscle mass each decade. And so, obviously strength training helps defer some of that strength loss. So if we can recruit motor units, make them work outside of their comfort zone, we're going to help stave off some of that muscle loss. But I think from an endurance athlete perspective, it's really important from a bone health aspect. And so cross country runners have some of the highest incidence of bone stress injuries. And, that can relate to just the overall volume that they're doing. We certainly know that red S plays a big role in that in adolescence, but we see that bone density in those cross country runners is relatively low. And so what the research is kind of showing is that running is really not a good bone building stimulus. So after about 20 back to back loading cycles, the bone cells essentially lose their mechanosensitivity. So they become deaf to that, and it doesn't have a mechanical response after the fact. So a lot of times people think of running as being really good from a bone density perspective. But what we know is that multiplanar loading is actually much more valuable. So a lot of that research comes out of gymnasts who have similar incidences of red S and things along those lines, but the bone density is much greater with that multiplanar loading compared to cross country athletes.
That's super interesting. And can you tell us kind of what multiplanar loading means in terms of actual strength exercises that you tend to be prescribing or suggesting for runners and triathletes?
Yeah, I think some of it is dependent on where the person is in the rehabilitation process, but it works up towards plyometric loading. So let's talk about the Achilles, for example. If we would start off with some bilateral heel raises and progress to single leg heel raises, but then to get that person ready to load or ready for running, we would add pogos or jumping rope and have them bound from one foot to the other foot. And those would be an example of some multiplanar loading activities. If people are coming back from a bone stress injury, we want to get them to the point where they're hopping, jumping, changing direction in a safe clinical setting. So we'll do a lot of box jumps, we'll do bounding on and off of one leg. But before getting to that point, it's all about gradually increasing the load with squats, single leg RDLs. And I think for runners in particular, running is really defined by that stance and float phase. So there's only ever one foot on the ground, and we want to train it as such. So I oftentimes put people in those single leg positions, and it's amazing that someone can run a 5.5 minute mile, but can't stand on one foot. And if we can start to get them to move better in those single leg positions, they become much more efficient and less injury prone over time.
Yeah, that's super helpful. Can I ask you too, what would you say is the minimum effective dose of strength training for a runner or triathlete? Like how often should we be hitting the gym in an average season? If we're doing a lot of this swim, bike, run, sometimes it can be hard to fit that in. So what do you see as the appropriate dosage there?
Yeah, there's an article that came out a few years ago, and it kind of talks about 2 times a week for 12 weeks as being the minimally effective dose. So I'll encourage people to try to get in between 2 and 3 times a week, especially as they're rehabbing. But if they're in a regular block, 2 times a week is kind of what we're looking for. I think people can be really efficient with the workouts too. They don't need to be an hour long. There's times for me where I'll set a timer on my phone for 30 minutes and I just get done what I can in 30 minutes. And that's all the time I have for the day. So I'll start my next workout later in the week where I left off and kind of work from there. And I think, as people get closer to races, sometimes we'll cut down to 1 day a week, but I do think two is kind of universally accepted as the minimally effective dose.
That's super helpful. And then final question on that is, let's say you don't have time to get to the gym or you don't have the resources to be at a gym with heavy weights right this second. Is there any way to kind of make this work at home, or is it really you need the heavy weights to do this? I'm just kind of wondering about like body weight equivalents or home plyo, stuff like that, ways to make strength work without the actual physical gym.
Yeah, good question. I think at the end of the day, running is not a easy sport. Like the demands on our body, our knees take 3 to 6 times our body weight, our calf takes 6 to 8 times our body weight. So at the end of the day, load is king. So having access to a gym, I do think is really important. But, I do think there's a lot that you can do at home from a body weight perspective. And that's where some of these single leg movements become even more important, where they can be challenging not only from a strength perspective, but from a balance and coordination perspective. And what I tell my athletes that I work with is really you want to feel like you're working hard in that 8 to 12 rep range. So a lot of times with something like a split squat or a runner step up, you really don't need any load whatsoever for that as people are starting off. And then it might be as simple as holding on to two 10-pound dumbbells or loading a backpack full of textbooks or whatever they have around the house. So as long as people are kind of hitting that 8 to 12 rep range and feeling like they're working hard, I think there's a lot of ways that you can do it around home. Bands, you can buy mini bands off of Amazon for like $15, and those will certainly be valuable from a hip strength and stability standpoint. So yeah, there's certainly ways around it, but at the end of the day, I do think with the demands of running, trying to get to the gym is an important piece to get adequate load.
Yeah, that's super helpful. And where do you put in mobility work in all this?
Yeah, so I think Jim, to steal your quote, you talk about being indoor cats a lot on the podcast. And I think, we all end up sitting on computers, driving. We have these postural stressors throughout our day that make us stiff in other ways. So I think from a mobility perspective, I generally try to do these prior to lifting. And the idea with them is that it helps us break these daily patterns and allows us to move more efficiently. So I'll add in things that don't have static holds. So 3 to 5 second holds or even a little bit less. So things like open the books, hip drops, the Osmomizer has been a new favorite of mine, but just ways to get the body moving. And because we're only doing a 3 to 5 second hold, we're using muscular stability to get in and out of that. We're not just hanging on end ranges. I think it's a really good way to prime your body and get ready to move, whether that's for lifting purposes or for a runner, swimmer, bike.
That's great. And if you're at home and you're an athlete, you're saying, do I have muscular imbalances like joint mobility, flexibility, strength issues? Like, how do I know besides like going to a PT? Like, is there an at-home test I can do?
Yeah, there's a bunch here. I have kind of three examples. The first one's for Achilles tendinopathy, and it's called the heel raise endurance test. And so, with this, all you need to do is set a metronome to 60 beats per minute, and you're going to be on one leg at a time, and you're going to go up to a beat, down to a beat, doing a heel raise. And basically, what you want to do is see how many repetitions you can do, maintaining the rhythm and also maintaining the height that your heel is coming off the ground. The way that this is supposed to be performed is on a 10% incline. So you can do it off of a step, but you want to go through that full excursion. And there's very specific norms for runners, but in general, if you're hanging around 25 reps, you probably have adequate calf strength. The younger you are, that bumps up. So, men in their 30s, it's kind of 32 is the cutoff. I think with that, what we look for is a big side to side difference. So, me personally, I've had some left Achilles issues that have kind of nagged over the course of the past 2 or 3 years. And the first time I did this test on myself, there was about a 7 rep difference between the two sides. And that slowly started to come down over time, but it's a super easy, digestible way to just check how strong your calves actually are. And again, they take 6 to 8 times their body weight during the stance phase of running. So, it's an important thing to check. Another one is a lateral step down test. So this can be used for a bunch of different things, but it's really looking at lumbopelvic control and single leg balance and control. And so what you're going to do is stand on a step, an 8-inch step. You're going to do a single leg squat. So you're going to tap your heel on the inside foot and you're set to a 30 beat per minute metronome. So a little bit slower than the heel raise test. And you're looking to be able to do 10 reps with adequate quick control and not falling, basically, no compensatory strategy. So teapotting one way or having to put your hand down or something like that. And then the last one that I have is a lat test. And I wanted to do this for swimmers. So, like with swimming, you need to be able to get into a streamlined position. So, this test, you basically just put your back up against the wall and you flatten your back out. So, you do a little posterior pelvic tilt. And then you're just going to take your arms and raise them straight up over your head and try to touch the wall behind your head without your back arching off the wall. And basically, we score that as like great, good, and fair. So if you can touch the wall, you have good or adequate lat length. If you're between your nose and the wall, you have some room for improvement. And again, oftentimes people have much more flexibility on one side versus the other as they do that.
That's awesome, Neil. I'm picturing all of our listeners like listening to this podcast and doing that test as I'm almost doing it in my chair right now,
Yeah.
trying to figure out where my lats are at. So that's super helpful. So our next question is, we think a lot about goodness fit with athletes and coaches, but I'm curious, if you're an athlete looking for a PT, what questions should you be asking to evaluate whether a PT is a good fit for you, and maybe the things that you're thinking about when thinking about working with an athlete?
Yeah, I think that's a great question and something where people should advocate for themselves and make sure that they're finding a practitioner that's a good fit for them. So I think at a bare minimum, asking, does that person regularly work with athletes? What's their experience like with endurance athletes more specifically? People are not going to get offended by that. It's way more fun from our end to have people that have similar interests and want to be. I think it's easier when there's commonalities between the two individuals. So certainly you feel free to ask those questions. I don't think that it necessarily means that the PT or chiro, whoever it is, has to be a runner or a triathlete. I think there's plenty of good providers that don't do that, but it's certainly helpful to have them understand where you're coming from a training perspective and understanding some of those intricacies. I think another great resource is just asking friends and local community members, ask people at the run club who they go to and, let their experiences kind of validate your choice moving forward.
Think we certainly all get tons of information from social media nowadays, and that's the upside of social media. But like, is there people that you would recommend folks following that talk a lot about injury prevention, athletic performance, that type of stuff?
Yeah, there's a few. Chris Johnson is kind of like one of the PT running gurus. It's a little bit more science heavy, but he does a lot of run specific strengthening, a lot of really good information about bone stress injuries versus tendon injuries. And you can find him on Instagram at Chris Johnson, the PT. The Montana Running Lab is another really good resource. Definitely more science heavy, but he does a great job breaking down recent research and kind of making it digestible for the everyday athlete. So things like running uphill and downhill, running on treadmills, how do those impact knee versus ankle forces and things along those lines. Someone new that just came across my radar is the swimming PT. I think he does a really good job of giving some easy digestible home exercises as well as mobility tests that you can do on your own. And he also does some stroke work. So looking at people's stroke and talking about how mobility or strength discrepancies could be affecting that.
That's awesome. Thanks, Neil. Yeah, these are perfect follows to add some good stuff to your feed. We're talking about how like social media is really, really bad, but I think if it's filled with these accounts, you're gonna have some good content in there. All right, so I'm thinking, Jim, to quote you, let's land this plane. I think our last question officially is, Neil, if you could wave a magic wand and have every athlete do 3 to 5 things multiple times a week, what would those things be?
Yeah, I think number one is just kind of checking in with your body on a weekly basis. So whether that's via a recovery walk, a foam rolling session, or just taking 5 or 10 minutes to decompress after a workout, assess your aches, pains, areas of stiffness, and how you're feeling both mentally and physically, and come up with a game plan or strategies to address those if there are things that pop up. I think it's super important, especially at this time of year. Don't ignore symptoms. You have time to take care of it now. Now's the time to address it. Number two would be strength training. It's supported over and over again in the literature. Make it part of your weekly routine and you won't regret it. I think you'll see a lot of efficiency improve, strength, power improve, and also the injury risk goes down pretty significantly. Prioritizing recovery. So the easy ones are sleep and diet, but making stretching, foam rolling, mobility a part of your weekly routine. Prioritize day off and just figure out what works best for you on a week to week basis. And then the last one, not that far out of left field here, but calf raises. They're chronically undertrained. And it's an area where you want to really try to mimic the demands of running. So again, you can do calf raises off a step. You can add in jumping rope or pogos to build some plyometrics into the mix. But I think that's something where if you could do 2 days a week of some calf specific strengthening, it'll go a long way.
Neil, this has been terrific. Thank you so much for coming back on and dropping all the knowledge. If folks want to reach you and come see you, how do they get a hold of you?
Yeah, so the easiest way to get a hold of me is via email. We can put that in the show notes, but more than happy to have conversations with people and located here in the Upper Valley. So if people are in the area, feel free to stop by.
Great. Okay. Well, thank you so much, Neil. And if you'll stick around for a couple more minutes, we may have you join us for our closing segment. So I think when we last interviewed you, we were not yet doing Challenge of the Week. So you get to be a part of Challenge of the Week. And then we're going to do a gear pick of the week. And reading ahead in our outline, it looks like all of our Challenge of the Week have to do with routine this week. So mine is everyone should work on improving your bedtime/wind down routine. For me, that usually means trying to turn screens off at least like 30 to 45 minutes before I go to bed, reading a little bit, breath work. It's kind of whatever works for you. But the idea is we all need a little bit more of a transition period between whatever we're doing that's busy. Right now it's evening. We're recording a podcast. I've got a lot to do. I have to pack. I have to do this and that. But I also need to wind down. So everyone can just try to figure out that routine and figure out what works for you.
Mine is, of course, improve your run warm up routine. And Neil has given us some great ideas in this podcast.
Fantastic. All right, Neil, take it away. What is your challenge of the week?
And mine's to try to define your active recovery routine. So whether that's going for a walk with your dog, going for an easy swim or spin, yoga, foam rolling, try to figure out some time where you can kind of touch base with your body and how you're feeling and address those issues before they become something more significant.
I really like that one because I really feel like we have these plans for workouts. I got a plan for workout. It's all written down, right? But I love this idea of like, here's my list of things that I'm going to do to be sort of active recovery. And I'm gonna pick off my list and it's very specific. So I think that's a great, just as much as you prioritize making workout plans, make this active recovery plan. That's a great idea.
And I'll add as a coach on this, you can put this stuff in Training Peaks. You can say, I'm putting in my little block to do 40 minutes of mobility work or yoga or whatever it is. You can turn that box green and you get the dopamine hit. So definitely consider that if you feel like you need your green box. All right, gear pick of the week, team. I'll go first. So I think this is going to be an endorsement of the week because this gear pick was actually recommended by Elena a long time ago. But I'm going to recommend the Naked Run Belt. This is an awesome run belt that has so many pockets. It can fit so much stuff. It can fit a soft flask. It can fit hundreds of gels. It can fit your phone, your keys. It can fit your friend. Whatever you need can all go in the Naked Run Belt. So this has worked really well for me recently. I will say their sizing is highly specific. So you need to get one of those tape measures and measure your waist and identify where you want it to fall on the waist, and it will be pretty snug. So just make sure you do the sizing right. But yeah, this has been awesome for me for some long runs recently.
You gotta love the run belt. It's the best. You put so much stuff in there. Would love it.
Exactly. All right, Jim, gear pick of the week.
I'm going to circle back to a review of a previous recommendation, which is the Hypervolt Go 2. It's like $100 now. It's basically it's a Theragun type thing, right? But I call it the Pounder. But it's very, very small. It's about half the size of my old one. And I thought, well, I'll just get it. It's $100, and maybe it won't be as good. It's just as powerful as my old one, and I just have it on me all the time. And I'm just constantly just doing different parts of my body. I use it as part of a run warm up. I also use it as part of my bike warm up, and it's also just a great way to get sort of in parasympathetic mode as well too. So again, really, I just find this tool. I have it everywhere, and it's going to be easy to travel with because it's so small.
And it's so small that I bet you could fit it in the Naked Run Belt if you wanted to bring it on your run, right?
There you go. Perfect. Yep.
Spot on. Okay. All right, Neil, take it away. What is your gear pick of the week?
I found the Precision Fuel and Hydration 30 gels a few years ago. And this past fall, I started using the PF90 gels. And it's basically 3 gels in one, has a screw on cap. So when you put it in your run belt afterwards, you're not going to get goo all over the place. So it's just a really quick and easy way to grab 1 or 2 of those up your door for a long run or bike. And you don't have the mess of a bunch of different gels.
That's fantastic. And can I ask you, Neil, do you have all 90 grams in one sitting? Do you sort of like sip on it and then put the cap back on? How do you approach these PF90s?
I think of it as 3 gels. So I'll like sip on it, put the cap back on, and then 20 minutes later when I need to go again, I'll take another sip out of it. So
Nice. It sounds like it's better for the environment too, which we love. That's fantastic.
I chuckled when I saw this because I just ordered some from the feed because I was looking for I like the 40, but then I thought, well, it's really nice to go out for a longer ski or something and something bigger. So I just got like 6 of these in the mail the other day. So I'm psyched to check them out.
Well, Neil, thank you so much. This has been fantastic. I feel like we've learned a lot, and we are definitely going to have you back on again because we can always learn more about how to bulletproof our bodies for the season. But actually, right before we close, I will ask you, what is on your race calendar this year? What are you prepping for this time of year?
yeah, I'm signed up for 73.3 Mont Tremblant. Yeah, Jim's got me on a good program and slowly putting in some mileage. So it's been good.
But he's prepping for his A event, which is in May, right, Neil?
Yes, my A event is in May. My wife is due at the beginning of May. So we'll see if I make it to the Mont Tremblant start line. But yeah, that's what we're super excited about. So
That's fantastic. Awesome. Well, congratulations, Neil. You've got so much exciting stuff on the radar. Keep us posted on how you're doing, and I'm sure we'll catch up soon.
thank you guys.
Thanks, peeps.